must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
The creation of African Continental Free Trade Area is a step forward for the African integration, and it is very much welcome both by Africans in Africa and those in diaspora. The creation of such is the only second one since the formation of World Trade Organization in 1994, and is only compared to the size that can compete if it works in Africa. 1.3 billion people will benefit out of this free trade that has been signed and endorsed by 54 heads of state. After several years of up and down in the valleys of Africa and the mountains of Africa, we finally came to a conclusion that this has to happen, which brings us to the dream of Kwame Nkrumah when he said, at least building a block by block, Africa will one day unite to stand as a united continent. But are the members of this African Union committed? Will they implement what they have decided? Today, in several countries, we see signs of xenophobia, the lack of patriotism amongst the younger generation, the lack of employment, the unemployment, the mistreatment of the young, the youth, those who need jobs, the corruption, the amount of corruption that has eaten the entire continent of Africa could hamper the free trade that we are anticipating on the continent. What measures, therefore, have African heads of state put in place to ensure that those who lag behind, those who drop out, must be penalized? We should not sign the document for the sake of documents, but we should sign documents for practical reasons that we shall implement what Africa needs today. Can it happen in our times? Is it going to happen? Is integration a mirage? Is integration worth going to happen? Will it happen? What has happened about the present blocks that have started integration process? What have they done? Is Africa integrating? Thank you.
It is ridiculous and it is against the laws of nature that we can have somebody sitting pretty who takes home more money than the credible entrepreneur who is doing actual production of goods and services.
We always say it as it is. It is only in this country that when a thief is arrested, you hear elders from their tribe saying, he is our son and he is our thief.
If you are deviant
Yes.
and I call you leader, probably you are already a leader, but you are leading in the wrong direction.
We want to see the role of the youth
Yeah.
in the security,
Yes.
governance,
Yes.
and development.
The youth that I meet and work with here, you know, we call them the millennials and X's and Y's, this and that. They don't necessarily want to live like their fathers and grandfathers, do business like their fathers and grandfathers. They're more independent, they're better educated, and they're the ones that are making everything move in this region.
We look at the issues, we talk about issues that impact people's lives in Africa. The African peoples themselves continue to cheer bad leaders, and because they cheer them on, they continue to be misled.
Let me ask you, Doctor, would you rather be somebody who does not enjoy so much freedom but you are rich?
Yes.
Or you'd rather be poor who you are actually imprisoned by the poverty itself?
My goal is not to come here and say, I want the majority ownership, I want to own this, I want to own that, I want to do this. My goal is we all make money and we're all happy, and I help build a big business here.
Punchline is for Africa, with Africa, from Africa.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome to Punchline Africa television, broadcasting all the way from the Republic of Kenya in Mombasa, and in Harare with string-ups in Berlin. Good evening. Good evening, viewers, wherever you are. Get a pen, a paper, and sit and watch this show, The Punch. The Punch is a show that is brought to you by Punchline Africa TV, looking at the best at so far, things that ail Africa, things that destroy Africa, things that kill Africa. What kills Africa? What ails Africa? The topic of today is a very simple topic. A straightforward topic which must be discussed by Africans, must be seen and talked to. We must discuss, chart the way, does Africa need elections? Or does Africa need consensus? Which of the two does Africa need? What mode of elections do you want in Africa? What type of elections do you want to conduct in Africa? Everywhere in Africa, there's a clamor for democracy. Several countries in sub-Saharan Africa clamor for democracy. The need for a democratic, fair, free, universal suffrage to be exercised in these democracies. But is the democracy that we yearn for, are we ready for it? Are we ready to make sacrifices as Africans? These are the questions that I want to answer tonight, together with my friends and live interviews right from Johannesburg. By phone, we shall be joined by none other than Dr. Rutendo, who will actually call us by phone from Johannesburg. Coming back to the reality of everything, is Africa ready for elections? Is Africa ready to move united before and after elections? How many elections in Africa are violent? How many violent elections in Africa occur? On 20th of November 2017, the Kenyan court upheld an election that was nullified on 8th of November, of August, by the Kenyan judges. This was one of the first elections in Africa to be nullified. It was one of the elections in Africa to be nullified, in the sense we had never seen such a thing, that an election is nullified by the Supreme Court. Several elections had been nullified, but not such an election that was conducted. Yes. It is therefore very, very important for us to understand why elections in Africa are violent. Do we need them, or do we need consensus? This is a question that I have asked very many people who have not answered. People have not answered my question. Professors, does Africa need elections? Are we ready for elections? Do we conduct ourselves in a manner that we can accept results after elections? That we can campaign without violence? That we can inject the spirit, civic education of voting and going home without asking somebody has stolen your elections? We can engage, can we? Do we have a social contract that can teach people that elections come and go, and tomorrow we can have another election? Are people willing to tolerate? Are people tolerant on this type of elections? My answer is no. We Africans are not ready for elections. We Africans are bad people when it comes to elections. We Africans destroy our properties, ourselves, kill ourselves because of an election. We Africans plot to kill others because of an election. When you look back at the Plato Republic, Socrates, Aristotle, what type of democracy did they prescribe for us to have? The question of term limits, the question of age limits, which have been contentious in African politics. Do we need it? Do we need elections? Almost every African leader today is seriously thinking of extending his age limit or his term limit. What happened to our values of our constitutions? In Africa today, almost everybody is trying to change the constitution. Almost every president wants to stick to power beyond the term limits. Very few countries still adhere to the principle of 2 term limits. We have seen so many presidents in the continent removing term limits within the constitutions. Therefore, do we need elections? Removing term limits brings you straight to the fight with the population that put there the term limits. Engaging age limit, which is a God-given virtue. I have no problem with anybody being a leader. At what age, I'm not concerned. I am interested in the delivery of the services. And let people get me very clear. I'm one of the few people who does not accept this question of restricting leaders to age. Because age does not matter. What matters is delivery of service. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, how you are, whether you are black or white or yellow. You need to deliver the services. It doesn't matter whether you came from a poor family, but you need to deliver the services to the people in order to have confidence from the people. It doesn't matter whether you are short or tall, whether you are 200 years or 120 years. What is important is the age. It's not the age, it's the delivery of the services. Are you capable? Are your people happy? Is there corruption? Have you fought corruption? Have you given them food? Have you given them medicine? Have you given them all the necessities of basic human beings as they are? Today in Africa, very few people go to that route. I will bring you examples across Africa. From Ethiopia, in 2005, Nigeria, 2007, Zimbabwe, 2008, Ivory Coast, 2010, Gabon, 2016. Uganda, 2016. Zambia, 2016. Angola, 2017. Ghana, 2012. Of course, the latest one is Kenya in 2017. If you look at the Kenyan scenario, do we really have to fight every time an election is conducted? Look at the current, the recently concluded elections in Nigeria. Nigeria has a population of 84 million registered voters. Out of 84 million registered voters, only 28 million voted. Where did the rest go? Uganda had 11 to 12 million voters. Out of 12 million voters registered, only 8 million people and as above voted. The rest did not vote. Kenya had 19 million registered voters. Out of 19 million registered voters, about 13 to 14 million took part in an election. The rest did not vote. The pattern goes on and goes on and goes on. And for us in Africa, we must think, why do we waste resources in registering people who don't turn up to vote? What is it that makes our elections in Africa not worth it? Are people, the state of apathy, the state of violence, the preparations of violence, the destruction of property? For the people who are soft, who have poor, hearts that can't stand this type of violence, would rather not go to a polling station and vote. They prefer to go home and sit and do something else. Is Africa preoccupied? The population, the governments? Look at this whole problem of Gabon, for example. The entire Gabon is a country where opposition leaders went and banned the entire Supreme Court. They banned the entire Supreme Court was burned down. The entire, entire parliament was burned down because of elections. We saw the entire system, 400 people killed in Gabon because of elections. Do we need elections? Does Africa need elections? Do we need elections? Or we need consensus? Time has come for us to reflect, to think again. But let me leave you with this election clip from Nigeria, if my production team can pick it, as we prepare to go to the second phase of finding out factors that make Africa not worth having an election. I'll enumerate them in the second part. Don't go away. Keep watching. Watch the Nigerian last-minute cancellation of elections. Such a country, 2 hours to a polling station, an election is postponed. Take the case of our country, Uganda. President Museveni wins his vote not through stuffing the ballot papers. And I would like to state categorically here that he doesn't stuff the ballot, but he wins through gerrymandering. The constituencies are already cut in size to favor the NRM. The NRM is very powerful in the rural areas, and the opposition is only in urban areas. We have to be very frank and speak about this. Why does opposition in Uganda always fail to get elected? is not because Museveni steals the votes. It is because the rural areas are already in favor of the incumbent who is President Museveni. And those are facts. Look at that clip from Nigeria as we speak and look at it, then I come back. Thank you. Cut. Play the clip. Play the clip. The creation of African Continental Free Trade Area is a step forward for the African integration, and it is very much welcome both by Africans in Africa and those in diaspora. The creation of such is the only second one since the formation of World Trade Organization in 1994, and is only compared to the size that can compete if it works in Africa. 1.3 billion people will benefit out of this free trade that has been signed and endorsed by 54 heads of state. After several years of up and down in the valleys of Africa and the mountains of Africa, we finally came to a conclusion that this has to happen, which brings us to the dream of Kwame Nkrumah when he said, at least building a block by block, Africa will one day unite to stand as a united continent. But are the members of this African Union committed? Will they implement what they have decided? Today, in several countries, we see signs of xenophobia, the lack of patriotism amongst the younger generation, the lack of employment, the unemployment, the mistreatment of the young, the youth, those who need jobs, the corruption, the amount of corruption that has eaten the entire continent of Africa could hamper the free trade that we are anticipating on the continent. What measures, therefore, have African heads of state put in place to ensure that those who lag behind, those who drop out, must be penalized? We should not sign the document for the sake of documents, but we should sign documents for practical reasons that we shall implement what Africa needs today. Can it happen in our times? Is it going to happen? Is integration a mirage? Is integration worth going to happen? Will it happen? What has happened about the present blocks that have started integration process? What have they done? Is Africa integrating? Thank you. Thank you very much, viewers. Welcome back to the second part of our show. It is 27 minutes past 8 o'clock. This show is The Punch. We are looking at the question to all of you viewers, does Africa need elections or we need consensus? Several countries in Africa, as you have seen, today as we stand, I've mentioned Ethiopia, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Ivory Coast, Gabon, Ghana, Zambia, Uganda, South Sudan, and then you look at the most interesting one, the current one, Malawi. The elections in Malawi were conducted by the Electoral Commission. The results were disputed by the opposition. You know what is happening in the streets of Blantyre and Lilongwe, where the government is threatening even to use the military to go in to disperse the demonstrators. Elsewhere in Africa, elections have caused friction. In Nigeria, for example, you saw 84 million registered voters, 28 million only voted. 54 or 56 were not anywhere to be seen. Is that an election? What creates insecurity in our election and the manifestos and electoral period? Look at the South African model. South Africa voted in May. The only country in Africa that has a stable election after the results are announced is South Africa. You don't find violence on the streets of Johannesburg. You don't find violence in Cape Town, people demonstrating. Why has South African model worked so well, which cannot work in Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania or Gabon or Democratic Republic of Congo? Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. As soon as the winner was announced, the opposition leader said, no, the vote has been rigged. He decided to call upon his followers to come to the streets, to fight, to burn, to loot, as if you are looting a country on Moon or Venus or Mars. You are looting the same country that you are going to read tomorrow. You are telling your voters to loot the same people, to kill the same people that you will be governing tomorrow. Does Africa need elections? Look at the model that took place in Gabon. Dr. Jean Ping ordered the burning down of, as I was said in the first part, of the National Assembly, the Constitutional Court, which had been there for centuries since the colonial days, because he disputed the results of an election. In Ghana, the opposition, led by Dr. Nana Addo, won an election despite the fact that they had rejected Mama Nana not to be the chairperson of that election. Surprisingly, the opposition in Ghana won an election. Dr. Mahama said, conceded, and went home. In Nigeria, Goodluck Johnson, Goodluck lost an election. He conceded, went back home for the safety and the good of Nigeria. This other election of Nigeria in 2020 had a lot of problems. They even postponed the election 2 hours before the polling stations could open. Is that what you call an election in Africa? In South Sudan, it's because of election that South Sudan finds itself today in the mess that it is in. Riek Machar wanted an early election, a democratic dispensation within the political parties. One of the reasons why violence sparks out is political parties have no internal democracy, which forms a basis of opposition leaders or leaders within political parties who go out and stand and oppose the president of that particular party. The case of South Sudan. Mr. Riek Machar was not happy with Salva Kiir. He told Salva Kiir to reform SPLA and SPLM. Salva Kiir stuck to his guns and said he was elected by the people and he's not going to listen to Riek Machar. Where are we today? We have bloodshed. We have people suffering in camps. A war has taken 384,000 people because of an election dispute or intended changes, democratic space that was needed in political parties. Has Africa learned how to conduct itself during and after elections? The answer is no. A big no in the sense that people don't conduct it themselves. There is no leader in Africa who writes 2 speeches. I have never seen Dr. Besigye writing 2 speeches in Uganda. He writes 1 speech. I'll win. My vote has been stolen. I have never seen leaders in Africa. I don't know whether President Museveni writes 2 speeches. I have never seen an African leader who writes 2 speeches except in South Africa. Malema wrote 2 speeches. Ramaphosa wrote 2 speeches. The leader of DA wrote 2 speeches, and other political parties. 1 for conceding and 1 for winning. Africa has not reached that level where leaders go to election with 2 speeches. We only go to election with 1 speech, and that 1 speech must work. If it doesn't work, then election has been stolen. Therefore, my question, does Africa need elections or we need consensus? Let's go on. Let's move. The type of electoral mechanisms, things that surround elections, if not cleaned properly. I want to thank President Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya for having thought of a BBI system, a landing space for many Kenyans to express what kills Kenya every day, every 5 years, is not that Kenyans hate each other, it's elections. There is nowhere in the planet that you can convince me that Kenyans hate each other to kill them during and a good 4 years. But when it approaches 5 years, you hear of machetes, you hear of arrows, you hear of sticks being collected. It is that makes me speak out against having elections in Africa. The best way to have Africa stable is to have a consensus type of approach. And I want to move harder and higher to go to China. China today lends money to us. 3/4 of Africa borrows money from China for infrastructure development. 90% of African countries today have China investment, lend money from China. But China itself has no elections. They have no MPs. We don't have members of parliament in China. We have a consensus type of politics where they know on merit who should be the leader in that particular location. And the Chinese come once in a year, once, to sit down, a population of almost 2 billion people, sitting down to decide the destiny of their country. And the same population lends us the money. We in Africa, we've not a population of Rwanda, for example, a population of only 14 million people, or 9 million people, or Burundi. They can't have even an election. They can't. They can't hold it peacefully. But China does not even hold elections. It selects people through a consensus method. Africa has not reached a level. I will make my conclusions later. Africa has not, will not reach a level where elections can be declared free and fair and the loser goes home without throwing stones. Viewers, it is very, very important, therefore, that we look at several factors. How many countries? For example, India takes 3 months voting. The elections in India take 3 months. A population of almost 2 billion people. People voting. But there has never been the type of violence. Yes, there are extreme cases, some of them of bribery and this and that, which are condemned and the people are taken to court and disqualified from elections. But you don't see a violence. A population of almost 2 billion people, the biggest democracy in Africa, in the world, does not even fight. But we in Uganda, with a population of 45 million people, we are all the time at the fighting at the edge. Even when election days have not been called, do we need elections in Africa? The answer still remains no. I would go further to say the economic impact of these elections in Africa. When you have disturbances, conflicts, you have chaos on the streets, rampage on the streets of Africa. It is an economic backlash against the economy of these countries where violence takes place. For example, Kenya lost quite a huge amount of money in terms of economy, and in terms of economics, huge amounts of money were lost. Several trucks were stranded. Business was not conducted. Huge amounts of produce going to rot. Exports slumped because of the few months from November up to March 2018, when the handshake took place, the consensus politics took place, that there was peace, and therefore Kenya regained in terms of the shilling shot up and the people started trading with peace and tranquility. Viewers, there's another factor that brings confusion in elections in Africa. And that factor is the judiciary. The judiciary in Africa plays a vital role to decide what do we go to the judiciary to do. We go to the judiciary to watch, to ask remedy. We go to the interpretation of what happened in the exercise of an election. The judiciary, most of them in African countries, are either government oriented or biased, bought by international agencies like George Soros, who bought the Kenyan judiciary in the first election of August 2018. I say this with confidence, 2017, sorry. I say this in confidence because I have facts how the Open Society Foundation, its cohorts, ambassadors, were able to contribute to the chaos that we had in Kenya after the nullification of 2017 8th August elections. I want to see whether there is any caller. Do you want to contribute to the debate? Hello, caller. Sorry, thank you very much. It's gone off. So when you look at the Kenyan election, the judiciary plays a part. The judicial part of Africa, which favors the government, also brings conflict in an election. It accelerates the election violence that we see in most Look at the ruling in Ivory Coast. In 2010, the court in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, ruled in favor of Babougo. The Constitutional Court of Cote d'Ivoire said Babougo won an election. But some people were not very pleased. That's the other factor I'm coming to. The external factor. The external factor which speaks volumes by itself. The external factor that brings about the direction under which we as people, citizens of this world, must stand up, watch, and either accept and run away with. Hello. Hello, sir. You are live on Punchline Africa TV.
Yeah, I wanted to contribute to the debate.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Go ahead. State your name and the place where you are calling from.
Yes, my name is Abraham Mutai and I'm calling from Nairobi.
Thank you very much, sir.
And the issue about if Africa needs consensus or we need elections, for me, I'm going to take another route and say that what Africa actually needs is a serious electoral reforms. That's what we need at the moment. If we look at the issues around Africa is that the elections are mismanaged and the bodies that actually manage the elections are not conducting these elections in the required manner. And therefore, most of the time, you find the results are disputed and of course you find glaring mistakes, you find glaring, very, very visible malpractices during preparation and of course during the election time.
Yes.
So the most important thing that we need in Africa at the moment is if we decide and actually implement a serious electoral reforms, starting from the institutions into the laws that govern the conduct of the election, and of course the mediation after the disputes, and of course the infrastructure. We're talking about the infrastructure that is used to hold these elections. For me, I think if we fix this one, we need elections because we pride ourselves in what we are saying that we are democracies, though we are not fully democracies, but we try to be. And Africans, I'm very sure Africans do not want dictators or rulers who stay there for a long time. Most of Africans would want, the change in leadership. So the best thing that we can do to Africa is to see how we can be able to introduce a serious electoral reforms to ensure that the outcome is not disputed and is something that both parties can agree to. So that's my contribution for.
Before you go, sir, I want to ask you a few questions.
Yes.
First of all, have you ever heard of any leader in Africa who writes 2 speeches before they go to an election?
I don't think there is any leader in Africa, especially the incumbents, the ones who are in office. I've never heard any who writes 2 speeches. It's only heard of in other countries, but in Africa, no, I don't think it's there in Africa. We could have seen it even in Kenya. It is not there.
Okay, another question.
Yes.
Is Africa, do we have enough social structures that make elections worth elections? Take an example of Nigeria, for example. It had 84 million registered voters. Only 28 million turned out to vote. The rest, 56 of them, millions of people, 56, did not vote. What makes Africa have that big, huge margin of sense of apathy. What are those conditions? Because once you answer that, then you will see that there is no need of an election in Africa.
The big problem, I've seen that one is almost everywhere, even in Kenya and in other parts like Zimbabwe, in other parts like even in DRC, we have seen the same case in even in South Africa sometimes back. The problem is that you realize that the leaders who are in power have disappointed the electorate. You find that those people who are in power and the ones who are jostling to get the power, they get power and repeat the same thing. They get power, loot the economy, and they fail on their promises, and they make most people are dejected. Most people are hopeless. They know that even if they vote, even if they don't vote, nothing will change. Like you've given an example of Nigeria. Nigeria before the elections of the other day, people were crying. I mean, the crime rate is very high. The population is growing very fast. The economy is doing badly. We have terrorism. Boko Haram is there. So they are feeling that the government is not doing enough. And something else is that most Africans feel that no matter what they do, no matter even if they walk to the ballot will not change their lives because they feel that the people in power will rig the election. And it's actually all over. I mean, they have that sense of feeling that the ballot cannot change anything. So therefore in Africa, the apathy, I can give it a percentage of 70% is because people feel that the ballot cannot work anymore. That's why I'm saying for us to have that change. And you have introduced a very important debate that if the ballot cannot work, why cannot then we go to consensus?
Exactly.
The problem with consensus is that people will be saying, who are now these people will be sitting down so that we can reach the consensus. We can have even
Can you hit the point of Kenya, for example?
For example, in Kenya, if
Yes.
you want us to talk about consensus, who do you want us to reach consensus between? Do you want us to reach consensus between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga and leave out the likes of Alfred Mutua, the likes of Hassan Joho, the likes of Kuro Okot, the likes of Mudavadi? Which kind of consensus? So when we talk about consensus, it will be very difficult and it can be even more chaotic because consensus is more of agreement, and agreement can cause chaos in the country. So the ballot for me is more, even if it is difficult, is more and more the easy way. But what we really need is to restore what we call the people's belief in the ballot. We need the people to believe in the ballot that it can change their lives. We want Nigerians, when they are voting, they believe that their vote is going to, remove Boko Haram. They will vote the strong person who can be able to deal with Boko Haram decisively. We want the people of Zimbabwe, when they are voting, they believe that their vote is going to change the state of the economy because the economy is doing badly there. We want the people in Kenya to feel that when they are voting, the vote is going to change the economy. It's going to remove corruption because corruption is the highest, one of the most serious issues in Kenya. So what we need in Africa, to me, is more of we need robust electoral reforms in Africa so that people can believe in it, so that people can believe in their vote, and they will walk to the booths and they will vote. So as of the moment, some of these people, they believe that even if I go to the ballot and I go and vote, nothing will change. That is the problem in Africa at the moment.
Before you go, I want to introduce one thing that I want you to comment on, because you have been with me. We went to Zimbabwe together. We saw the preparations. Are there external forces that influence our elections on the continent?
Yeah, definitely there are external forces. One thing you need to understand is that there are so many companies and firms that are working in Africa, from the United States, from China, from Europe and the other places. And Russia is not so much into sub-Saharan Africa because Russia has only visited since 1961. They have visited only one sub-Saharan country, that is South Africa. So these other countries who have this interest in Africa, you find that they want friendly presidents or friendly people who can be able to continue with their deals, their economic deals, their business deals, like we've seen. And then there's also NGOs. Like we have other of stuff. These are people who are so well off in terms of businesses. Their companies are in Africa, and this is the problem even in DRC. DRC, there are so many companies, almost 35 companies who are mining in DRC. Despite the problems there, the people are dying and there's a lot of problems. But there are so many companies who are mining at the moment and taking the wealth of DRC to other countries like Europe and America. So you see now, these are the people who influence our elections, because they would want people who will come into power to be the people who are going to help them to continue exploiting these resources and to continue, doing business with them. So for me, I agree. There are external forces and they are very powerful, because the problem is our leaders. They are greedy. Now the issue here is for us to deal with these external forces is to get people who are strong enough to resist these external forces. We need people who are strong enough. For example, in DRC, we need people who are strong enough to tell these external forces that we will not give you the minerals, but we want to do business with you. We want to see how will these minerals benefit ourselves, and also as you extract these minerals, how are they going to benefit our people, so that they can, they can be able to stop the killings that are ongoing on the eastern DRC.
You raised a very good question of electoral reforms. Kenya is undertaking two styles of changing the constitution. One is Punguza Mzigo. The other one is the BBI. You have read the Punguza Mzigo populist called public so-called document of Ekure Court. We haven't read what the BBI will bring. In your view, after reading the Punguza Mzigo, even if you reduce MPs to zero, will you kill the wage bill?
We will not, in my view, we will not kill the wage bill, because the wage bill is actually distributed across the country. It is in the counties, it is in the executive, it is in the judiciary. So if we just reduce the representation, does not really kill the wage bill. But something else that I noted myself is that I'm not saying I'm a supporter of Punguza Mzigo, but I am this kind of a person. I'm saying that let's debate Punguza Mzigo, and then let's also debate the BBI when it comes.
Yes.
BBI is initiated by Kenyans. The BBI has been initiated by Kenyans. The Punguza Mzigo has been initiated by Kenyans. It doesn't matter who is funding, because if you talk about BBI, it's also being funded by some people. If you talk about Punguza Mzigo, it's also being funded by some people. But the people who are fronting these ones are also Kenyans. So my view is that let us debate these issues. Let's have a debate and see which one, which are some of these things that are helpful and which are some of these things that are going to help us. So for instance, you've talked about the reducing the representation in Kenya. For me, I'm for reducing representation, but I'm not for reducing representation because it will reduce the wage bill, because it will not actually reduce the wage bill.
Exactly.
The thing is, we have so much representation in Kenya. We need to be honest. The honest that we need to be, we need to gauge ourselves against other countries. Look at, for example, China. China, they have 1.2 billion people, but they have 3,000 people representing all of those. Look at, for example, USA. USA, they have almost 400 million people, but they have only 500 people representing all of those. Look at other countries like,
And by the way, Abraham, China does not have MPs.
You see, but they are doing well. They are a superpower. They are an economic superpower.
They lend us the money, and then we eat the money.
They are taking us captive right now. So for me, I am for reducing the wage, the representation, not because actually it reduces the wage bill, but because we have so many people making noises. Other MPs, we don't even know other MPs. Who are they? We don't even know others. Others have not even spoken in parliament for almost 7 years now. So we were doing well with 214 or 222 way back. We were doing so well, and we didn't even have governors, senators, and all of those people. We were doing so well. So for me, I'm saying let's reduce these people, not because they will reduce the wage bill, but because actually there's too many. There are just too many. Why are we paying all of these people, and for what?
Okay.
So that's my view as far as this.
Any last comment regarding our setting up our punchline our punch program, because we want you to be a permanent analyst, strategist on the program. As
I've been following the program, and I feel that I've been following the program, and I feel that it is a very good program that we need to promote across Africa. And there are so many issues across Africa that I would like to comment about. We have the issues in Cameroon, we have issues in Gabon, we have issues in
Nigeria.
We have issues in Nigeria, and then we have a very big problem in Central African Republic.
Yes.
That most people don't even talk about. That country has been ravaged by diseases, ravaged by terrorists. They don't have leadership, they don't have government, and nobody's talking about it. We have issues in countries like Togo, where the president has been holding on to power. We have issues in DRC, one of our biggest countries in Africa that we need to protect. It has one of the largest resources in Africa. So I like the program because one of the few programs that actually talk about these issues across Africa. So I like the program, and I normally watch the one at around 10 and 8. I listen to the radio Punchline, and I love it. I'm a very big fan. I normally watch online, and I normally listen online. So I would also want to be invited to be one of the guest panelists, so that at least we can further this discussion.
You are welcome. You are welcome. You will next week use your satellite or your Skype to reach us. You don't need to come to our studio. Our satellite will pick you direct from where you are. But before you go, let me tell you one shocking data here. From 1990 to 2012, 390 elections were held.
Yes.
132 elections had violence, pre-arranged violence.
Yes.
91, they had post-election violence. In countries like Botswana, South Africa, Ghana did not have those post-election violence and the violence at all. But the countries like Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, Sudan itself, where Khartoum is, Asmara in Eritrea, Ethiopia, Ivory Coast, Togo, Gabon, Malawi, all these have had post-election. You can see the amount of what elections bring to Africa. So I want to leave you and thank you very much, sir, Dr. Our strategist, Abraham Mutai. Thank you very much for the contribution to human beings and humanity. We like your analysis on Twitter and Facebook. You tell it as it is, and you join a club of well-organized Pan-Africans who say it as it is. We continue doing it. Thank you. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, viewers. That was Abraham Mutai, one of our correspondents within Kenya, a political strategist who comments on international relations and affairs, a social commentator who made cardinal points. He needs electoral changes, mechanisms. The problem, for example, like in Kenya, you need proportional representation. There is nothing that will solve Kenya's problem. If you don't have proportional representation in Kenyan elections, you'll still have violence, however much you try to run away from the violence. That is a fact. Lastly, I want to come back to the question that I asked as to whether we need politics of consensus or we switch to elections which is competitive. I believe out of all the discussions from our tally, we had almost 50-50. 47% of the people today sampled per second. You see, when you see that, those are figures meaning per second who are anchored on. Our machine has brought us 47% say they need consensus. 53% say they still need elections in Africa. So we shall continue with the debate. Next week, we are supposed to bring Dr. Rutendo, but unfortunately, we have tried to get hold of him, and he's going to join us next week in another same debate, the same time. This show is The Punch. We look at topical issues that bring Africa to disrepute, that cause violence in Africa. We leave you to watch your main news. We leave you to enjoy our programs. You can, if you missed it from the beginning, you can go ahead and look at it later. Make your comments, your contributions. But yes, Africa must look at that question. Does Africa need elections or we need consensus? I want to thank President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Amolo Odinga for having created this axis of consensus. We are looking at the politics of consensus. I am looking at talking about what we can do with modified handshake level to other African countries. Look at what is happening in Zimbabwe. Chamisa needs to come back and sit down on the table. The people that you are killing are your own people. Why do you kill your own people? Why do you slaughter your own people? Why do you destroy your own property? Why do you burn your own property? Yet you can sit down and engage this gentleman that you stole my votes, but I'm going to stand by the people of this country and shake hand with you, allow you to finish your 5 years, give me my space to reorganize my party, and I come back, I'll defeat you because you stole my election. How many people are willing to do that in Africa? Do we have enough civic education? The answer is no. Why do we have apathy? In every election in Africa, there is apathy. Why? People are not educated enough. They don't see the reason why they should go to vote. When Boko Haram is killing them, when Biafrans are having a problem, when Amazonians cannot even eat food in their own houses, when the Dinka or the Nus cannot move in the territory of the Dinka or the Nu, when in Malawi, Mutharika's supporters cannot see the supporters of the vice president who was in the same party with Mutharika. When in Maputo, people cannot see eye to eye. Some resort to guns and go to the bush. Why can't we develop a mechanism that will stop this cycle of violence year out every 5 years? Does Africa need elections? Continue debating. 47% says consensus is the best way. 53% say, yes, we need the elections. Thank you very much, viewers, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for tuning in right now from Mombasa, the capital city of the coast, and in Harare. We thank you very much. One of our correspondents, Abraham Mutai from Nairobi, wherever you are, thank you very much for your contribution this evening. Those who have taken the notes, thank you very much. If you have questions, send your questions to us. We shall answer them. God bless you. This station, therefore, is for Africa, by Africa, with Africa. Ciao.
must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.